Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for tuning in this evening for our online Bible study. Let's get into it. I welcome you. If you are new to this study, I'm Pastor Dave St. Aubin. It's a joy to be with you here this evening. Tonight, we will be looking at the book of Daniel, chapter 8. So I invite you to grab your Bibles, open them up to Daniel 8, grab something to take some good notes with, grab a beverage, grab a snack. Let's get into it. Well, again, good evening and welcome, and thanks for tuning in. I do pray that your day's been going well. Pray that you had a great weekend. Happy Monday. Good to be with you here again as we continue our journey through the Bible one chapter at a time. And we have made it now into the book of Daniel, chapter 8. So we will be wrapping up the book of Daniel this week by Friday, and then moving on to the next book. And so I welcome you, whether this is your first time with us, or maybe you've been with us from the very beginning of the study, way back in September of 2022, 3.5 years ago. Or maybe you've joined somewhere in between. It's a joy to be with you. We have folks from all over the country in several different states, here in Nebraska and in Michigan and Ohio and West Virginia and Pennsylvania, Indiana, Illinois, Missouri, Arkansas, Florida, New Jersey, Texas, Arizona, California. If I missed your state, say hello. Let us know where you're from. It's just a blessing to be with you here. Daniel chapter 8. We are in a couple long chapters this week. This is one of them. The other will be on Thursday. But now we're going to see another vision here. And this is the vision of the ram and the goat. Now in chapter 7 that we looked at last Friday, we saw the general history of the times of the Gentiles, which Jesus talked about in Luke's gospel. That the time of the Gentiles is from the time that Nebuchadnezzar took the Israelites into captivity until the Son of Man, until Jesus returns to earth. That's the time of the Gentiles, which we are living in now. Chapter 8 is going to reveal more detail about the second and the third kingdoms, the Persians and the Greeks, and how they relate to Israel. And if you remember in Nebuchadnezzar's vision in chapter 2 of this giant statue with the head of gold, which represented Babylon, and then the upper torso and the arms of silver, which represented Persia and the Medes, and then the iron lower torso, which represented the Greeks, and then the legs, which represented represented the Romans. So here we're going to see in chapter 8 some detail about the Persians and the Greeks, the second and the third kingdoms. Chapter 8 is the last of the book of Daniel's symbolic visions. We're going to see other revelations coming throughout the rest of the week that are more verbal, but they are not symbolic like we're going to see here. This is the last of the symbolism. So we do have a lot to talk about tonight. So let's get right into it here. Open up your Bible to Daniel chapter 8. If you don't have a Bible with you, not a problem. As always, we put all the verses up here on the screen so you can follow along, take some good notes tonight. And let's start with verse 1 and 2, and this is the setting of this vision. In the third year of King Belshazzar's reign, I, Daniel, had a vision after the one that had already appeared to me. So the third year of Belshazzar's reign was about 551 BC, 2 years after Daniel recorded the vision in chapter 7, and about 12 years before the events of chapter 5. So I had mentioned last week, these chapters aren't chronological. These would be fit in between chapter 4 and chapter 5 of this book. But Daniel's living in Babylon. He's living in the kingdom of Babylon, the first beast of chapter 7, and the head of this statue of chapter 2. So this isn't a dream that's combined with chapter 7, the vision in chapter 7, verse 1. This is just a vision, and it most likely came to Daniel during the daytime. And again, he says it's after the one that already appeared to me. That is referring to the last vision that we saw in chapter 7, verse 1. In this vision, I saw myself in the citadel of Susa, in the province of Elam. In the vision, I was beside the Ulai Canal. We'll talk about all these places here, but Daniel's in Babylon when he has this vision. What he sees, including seeing himself, was taking place in Susa. So he's in Babylon, but in this vision, he's not in Babylon per se. He's in Susa. Daniel probably recognized that he's in Susa in this vision because he had most likely visited this place. It's reasonable to assume that the position that he held in the Babylonian government would have led to him going to Susa. Where is Susa? Susa was about 200 miles east of Babylon. Today, it's about 150 miles just due north from the top of the Persian Gulf. So you can Google that, you can look that up. Susa would be modern-day Iran. Babylon would have been modern-day Iraq. So this is the area that Daniel would have been in. He would have been in modern-day Iraq in Babylon, and the vision would have been modern-day Iran in Susa. Now, Elam, he's in the citadel of Susa in the province of Elam. Elam was the name of the Persian province where Susa was located. After the Persians overthrew the Babylonians, Susa, which was the former capital of the Elamites, the Elamite kingdom, it was absorbed in. It just became another capital within the Persian Empire. 80 years after Daniel had this vision, Susa became Esther's home. And we looked at that way back in the book of Esther. So, chronologically, things aren't necessarily in order in this book, but this vision gives us an idea of the time frame here. 100 years after this, Susa would have been the city from where Nehemiah departed to return to Canaan. And you can look that up in Esther chapter 1 and Nehemiah chapter 1. So this is the location. What about the citadel? Well, the citadel was just the palace where the royal residence was located. It was surrounded with strong fortifications. It was a very secure place. The Ulai Canal would have been a artificial canal that connected two rivers that ran very close to Susa. So Daniel recognizes this place. He's probably been there before. He sees himself in this citadel that houses the royal palace in Susa, which is 200 miles east of Babylon, in the province of Elam, which was the kingdom of the Elamites before the Persians conquered them, and he was beside this canal where these two rivers converged. Verse 3. And I looked up, and there before me was a ram with two horns standing beside the canal. And the horns on the ram were long. One was longer than the other, but later on it grew. So the ram that Daniel sees standing before the canal represents the kings of the Medes and the Persians. We'll see that in verse 20. This corresponds to the lopsided bear that we saw in chapter 7, verse 5, in that vision. So these two horns, again, we've talked all throughout this study. Horns represent power. So these two horns on this ram represent the power of the Medes and the power of the Persians, these two kingdoms that formed an alliance that came together that created this Persian Empire that overthrew the Babylonians. The longer horn represented Persia, which was the more powerful of the two between the Medes and the Persians. Eventually, the Persians in this alliance would displace the Medes in any type of leadership form. So the ram was especially important as a symbol to the Persians. The guardian spirit of the Persian Empire was portrayed as a ram. When the Persian kings would go into battle, they would carry before them the head of a ram. So the ram represents the Persian Empire. The two horns represent this alliance, the Persians and the Medes, the longer horn being the Persians, the shorter being the Medes. It represents strength, right? But also in the ancient world, the ram was, and as it is today, a zodiac sign. Aries is the ram, which represented Persia. Capricorn, which comes from the Latin capr, which means goat, and cornu, which means horn. Capricorn or goat horn. That represented Greece. So the ram here is Persia with its two horns, its strength, its power of this alliance of the Medes and the Persians. Verse 4, and I watched the ram as it charged toward the west and the north and the south. And we'll talk about this here in a second. And no animal could stand against it. None could rescue from its power. It did as it pleased, and it became great. So historically, the Persian Empire pushed its borders in three different directions. Westward into Lydia and Macedonia, northward towards the Caspian Sea and the mountains, Caspian Mountains, and southward toward Babylon, Canaan, and Egypt. Again, there's comparison here that can be made between the three ribs in the mouth of the bear that we saw in the vision in chapter 7, verse 5. So these advances by the Persian Empire, they happened primarily under the leadership of Cyrus. And Persia in its own way had for many, many years glorified itself. Nothing could stand against it. None could be rescued from it. It did as it pleased. It became great. It pushed its boundaries in these three directions. And Daniel says, verse 5, as I was considering this, as I was thinking about this, pondering this vision, suddenly a goat with a single prominent horn between its eyes came from the west. Remember, the Persians were pushing to the west. This goat comes from the west, crosses the whole earth without touching the ground. So the goat here represents Greece. And as I had said, the ancients regarded these animals as symbolic. Aries, the ram, stood for Persia. Capricorn, the goat, stood for Greece. The Persians are pushing westward, and the Greeks are pushing eastward. So the goat represents, and we'll see this in verse 21, the kingdom of Greece. Now, Alexander the Great is the horn, the single horn. And history has confirmed this, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later tonight. But note here that goats normally have two horns. This one has one, so this is an unusual goat. And some, references will say, well, this is symbolic of a unicorn, possible, right? But this is Alexander the Great, this horn, the strength of the Greeks, the goat. And Alexander's conquest of the ancient Middle East and the Near East happened within 3 years. This was very unique in military history. It was a lightning speed advance of this single horned goat. Alexander the Great came in and ravaged everything. And he was outnumbered. The Persians had a superior military. military equipment. The Persians had war elephants. The genius of Alexander the Great, proved to be superior to the Persians. It came from the west. It crossed the whole earth without even touching the ground. Verse 6. And it came against the two-horned ram, the Persians, that I had seen standing beside the canal, and it charged at it in great rage. I saw it attack the ram furiously, striking the ram, shattering its two horns. The ram was powerless to stand against it. The goat knocked it to the ground, trampled on it, and no one could rescue the ram from the power of this goat. Why did the Greeks attack the Persians? Well, the Persians previously attacked the Greeks several times. And so the Greeks here, Alexander the Great, is retaliating against his enemy with great vengeance. And Alexander won two very significant battles against the Persians, 334 and 333 BC. And he finally subdued the Persians with a victory in Nineveh in 331 BC. This was a very swift conquering by the Greeks over the Persians, who were outnumbered. They didn't have the same military armament. Didn't matter. Alexander came in and just ravaged them. And the goat, verse 8, became very great. This is the Greeks. But at the height of its power, the large horn, Alexander, was broken off. And in its place, 4 prominent horns grew up toward the 4 winds of heaven. So this description corresponds to the third beast in Daniel 7, verse 6 that we looked at Friday. Alexander the Great, verse 8, the goat became very great. Well, he made himself very great in 2 ways. One was by extending the borders of his empire. After he conquered the Persians, he pushed even further east into modern-day Afghanistan. The empire of the Greeks under Alexander the Great covered over 1 million square miles. He also became very arrogant. He regarded himself as divine, and he made his subordinates, his soldiers, bow down before him, which eventually would lead to his troops revolting against him. So Alexander, who was able to conquer more of the world than any previous ruler leading up to this point, greater than the Assyrians, the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Persians, he couldn't overcome himself. He was Alexander the Great died in a drunken, excessive self-indulgence at Babylon, not even into his early 30s. And when he died, it left the Greek Empire without a single leader. So when we see here that the goat became very great, but at the height of its power, the horn was broken off, and in its place 4 other horns grew. This is an indication of the 4 parts of the Greek Empire that came out of this death of Alexander the Great. And it's very interesting here that alcohol played a significant role in the fall of the Babylonians, in the fall of the Persians that we saw, where the Persian emperor was at this drunken party, right? Or rather, the Babylonian emperor was at this drunken party as the Persians were coming in to defeat him. Now it's the same thing with the Greeks. Verse 9. So out of one of these 4 horns came another horn, which started small but grew in power to the south, to the east, and toward the beautiful land. So Daniel sees the strong horn broken off, Alexander the Great. Out of that comes 4 other horns, which are 4 distinct parts of the Greek Empire, which we'll talk about that. And out of that, he sees another horn, which replaces the single horn, Alexander the Great. So this horn is different from the little horn that came up among the 10 horns of the fourth beast in Daniel chapter 7 that we saw last week. This little horn grew very great to the south, the east, and the beautiful land. What's the significance of these directions? Well, I'm going to get into some history here, but not a lot. So, read up on this. This is interesting. We've seen history unfold, and we learned these things in school, and we probably thought, who cares about the Greeks back in 300 BC? This is Daniel's vision that has come to pass. So history has identified this little horn replacing Alexander as Antiochus IV, who ruled the Syrians from 175 to 164 BC. And Antiochus conducted military campaigns in all of these different directions, the south, the east, and the beautiful land. And so we know from that this point of reference here is Syria. The beautiful land. It's hard to identify that is, and without going into a lot of expository work, and again, you can read up on this, you can get different commentaries, but this is most likely reference to Canaan. So here the vision begins to focus on the future of Israel and the Israelites. Antiochus was especially vengeful against the Israelites. He persecuted them brutally. He is one of the greatest persecutors Israel has ever known. In one assault on Jerusalem, in a 3-day period, 40,000 Israelites killed, 10,000 more taken into captivity. And all this suppression by Antiochus over the Israelites, it came to a head in 168 BC when Antiochus returned in frustration from Egypt, where the Romans had turned him away in defeat, right? He's trying to expand his empire, and this is where the Roman Empire starts to come into power, and the Romans defeat Antiochus, and in his fit of rage over losing, he turns all that on the Jews, on the Israelites. He sent in 20,000 troops on the Sabbath to seize Jerusalem, and he erected an idol of Zeus, and he desecrated the altar by offering pigs as a sacrifice on this altar. When we get to chapter 11 here on Thursday, we'll see this, because this idol that he erects comes to be known to the Israelites as the abomination of desolation. And 4 years later, in 164 BC, Judas Maccabeus, the Maccabeans, and you may have heard about this revolt. He was a Jewish nationalist, and he leads the Jews into a revolt and rededicates the temple to Yahweh. And that's the event that the Jews celebrate with Hanukkah ever since this period. So there's just a little backstory. How did Hanukkah come into being? Well, it goes back to Antiochus and the Syrians just punishing the Jews mercilessly, all because the Romans had defeated him. He hated them and erected this false idol in the temple and sacrificed pigs on it. Well, the Jews revolted. This is the beginning of Hanukkah. So verse 10, it grew until it reached the host of heaven. This is this little horn. And it threw some of the starry host down to the earth and trampled on them. So this little horn, Antiochus, grew up to the host, the lights of heaven, and caused some of the hosts, which are also called stars, to fall to the earth, who trampled on them. The stars refer to the children of Israel that God had predicted would be as numerous as the stars of heaven. That goes back to Genesis when God spoke to Abraham. This is a reference to one of his armies. God has an army here. It's the army of this host of heaven, the gathering of the saints, right? His other army is the angelic, and we're going to see that here in a bit too. Verse 11. It, Antiochus, this horn, grew. It set itself up to be as great as the commander of the army of the Lord. And it took away the daily sacrifice from the Lord, and his sanctuary was thrown down. By desecrating the temple and building this idol of Zeus, Antiochus, whose name means the illustrious one, he's exalting himself to a position of power, superiority, right? Sovereignty over God, the commander of the host of the Jews. And an attack on the place that was set aside for worship of God was the same as attacking God himself. He's setting himself up to be above God. And he ends, at least temporarily, sacrifice in the temple, which included the morning sacrifices, the evening sacrifices, and thereby he was depriving God of the worship of the people. He didn't tear down the temple. He desecrated it to such a point that it couldn't even be used for worship. Antiochus, his actions anticipate what the Antichrist, the little horn in chapter 7, was going to do in the future. This book of Daniel is just, it's fascinating because we've seen a lot of this unfold, and we know through the book of Revelation and John's vision what's going to come. Verse 12, because of the rebellion, the Lord's people and the daily sacrifice were given over to it. It prospered in everything it did, and truth was thrown to the ground. God's going to give control of the host, the Israelites, to the little horn, Antiochus, because of an offense they had done or a wrongdoing they had committed. Meaning that God's going to use Antiochus just like he used Nebuchadnezzar, just like he's using Cyrus, just like he uses many others to carry out his discipline of the people, all because of their sins. So Antiochus is going to terminate the sacrifice. He's going to disregard the truth. He's going to destroy the scrolls of the Torah. He's going to do as he pleases, and he's going to succeed. That's what all this is saying. This verse, again, it makes the identification of the host as being the Israelites. It's not the angels here. This is the people of God. That Antiochus, God's going to give him the authority to come in and do these things. But again, it's still God who is sovereign. Then I heard a holy one speaking, verse 13. And another holy one said to that holy one, how long will it take for the vision to be fulfilled? The vision concerning the daily sacrifice and the rebellion that causes the desolation and the surrender of the sanctuary and the trampling underfoot of the Lord's people. How long is this going to be allowed? The holy ones here that Daniel hears conversing are apparently angels. So here, the transgression in view is not on the Jews, it's Antiochus. It's causing this horror within the people because the temple is being desecrated. And so this one angel wants to know from another angel how long? How long is this desecration of the sanctuary and the persecution of the Jews and the army of the Jews? How long is this going to last? And he said to me, right? So the angel's replying, but he's replying to Daniel. It will take 2,300 evenings and mornings, and then the sanctuary will be reconsecrated. Why is this one angel answering Daniel and not the first angel? Well, it's apparently to give comfort to Daniel and to the people, the Israelites. How long is this going to take? Well, the angel says the desecration is going to last 2,300 evenings and mornings. Many commentaries will take this as meaning 2,300 24-hour days, which in a sense is 6 years, 4 months, and 20 days. Because the Jews, going back to Genesis 1, describe a day, a 24-hour day, as evening and morning. That goes back to the creation. It was evening and morning the first day. So 2,300 of these would be 6 years, 4 months. Other commentaries will double that, meaning no, it means 2,300 mornings and another 2,300 evenings, so 12 years, 9 months. Other interpreters try to explain this as these are years, 2,300 years, but most likely the 2,300 evenings and mornings describe a period of time of 24-hour days, because Antiochus did his worst to the people and to the temple within 3 years, 167 to 164 BC. So most likely this is 2,300 24-hour days, 3 years, and 4 months, or 6 years and 4 months. The duration isn't so much what is important here. It's what's being fulfilled in prophecy. The Israelites did something that sinned in the eyes of God. He's allowing Antiochus to carry out this punishment of the Jews, but it's for a time, a limited time. And then the next verse. And let me just back up here. Because there's so much in this, and we could spend a week just talking about what this time period is and who these individuals are and what it all means. I encourage you to research it, to study it, but regardless of the 2,300 evenings and mornings problem, like how long is that? 3 years, 6 years, 12 years? There's a general agreement among scholars that Antiochus fulfilled this prophecy. So this was most likely a time of persecution when he dominated the Israelites. Verse 15. While I, Daniel, was watching this vision and trying to understand it, there before me stood one who looked like a man, and I heard a man's voice from the Ulai calling, Gabriel, tell this man the meaning of the vision. So just as in chapter 7, verse 16, where Daniel had a hard time and he needed help to interpret what he had seen, he needs help here. And he sees someone who looks like a man standing before him, but evidently was an angel. And Daniel hears a voice that he could understand, probably God's voice, instructing the angel by name to help Daniel understand this vision. And this name was Gabriel. Gabriel means strong man of God, or God has shown himself strong. Gabriel is one of only 2 angels, and actually the first that the Bible identifies by name. Gabriel, the other being Michael. And the book of Daniel is the only Old Testament book that identifies any angel by name. But we'll see Gabriel again. We'll see Michael again, most prominently in the New Testament. But by calling him Gabriel, strong man of God, that reflects the importance of the interpretation of this vision. Strong man of God, this child, Daniel, is not able to understand. Explain it to him. Verse 17. So as he came near the place where I was standing, I was terrified, and I fell prostrate. And he said, Son of man, understand the vision concerns the time of the end. So Gabriel's approach towards him made Daniel so afraid that he fell flat on his face on the ground. I would as well. Now, the title, Son of Man, stresses an individual's humanity. Here, it's in contrast to Gabriel, who is a strong man of God. So, Son of Man stresses Daniel's humanity, his weakness as a human. And Gabriel introduces the interpretation of this vision by explaining that it concerns the time of the end, or the end times. This vision deals primarily with events yet in the future, at least from Daniel's viewpoint in history. And again, we know that a lot of this has already come to pass. So the time of the end is a reference to the day of the Lord that other prophets have shared. It can refer to a more immediate future day or an end times day, depending on the context. For Daniel, it was both. For us, it's an end times day because the Babylonians, the Persians, the Assyrians, the Greeks, the Romans, those empires have all fallen. Antiochus has fallen. So for us, some of it is in the past. Other parts of this is end time prophecy. Verse 18. So while he, Gabriel, was speaking to me, Daniel, I was in a deep sleep with my face on the ground. So he fell prostrate, and now he's in a deep sleep. He's fainted. But the Hebrew word here for this really denotes a coma-like state of deep sleep. It was brought on by this supernatural experience. So he's not just passed out. He is in this deep coma-like state. And then he, Gabriel, touched me and he raised me back up to my feet. So he revives Daniel, Gabriel does. Why? To prepare him to receive the remainder of the interpretation of the vision. Because Gabriel's just started to explain. Understand, this concerns the end times. Daniel passes out. Gabriel revives him and does this so he can tell him the vision, right? He hasn't even told him yet. Verse 19. And he said, I'm going to tell you what will happen later in the time of wrath, because this vision concerns the appointed time of the end. So Gabriel is clarifying that what he's going to explain to Daniel deals with the appointed time in the end. This, from Daniel's perspective, is in the future. Does it refer to Antiochus? Does it refer to the end times when Jesus returns? Does it apply to both? A conclusion among scholars here is that the prophecy here relates to both the end times future for Daniel and the end times future for all of us. So both. Verse 20. So here's the explanation. The two-horned ram that you saw represents the kings of Media and Persia. It's what I shared earlier when we started the study tonight. So Gabriel identifies the ram. Here's what the ram means. It's these two leaders of the Medes and the Persians. The Persians is the longer of the two horns. They've come together, and they form this ram. Verse 21, the goat, but the shaggy goat. So here, Gabriel describes the goat as shaggy. That's the king of Greece, which I just shared. This is Alexander the Great. The large horn between its eyes is the first king, Alexander. So the goat represents Greece. The large horn is the first king of Greece, which was Alexander the Great. Verse 22. The four horns that replace the broken horn, Alexander, represent the four kingdoms that will emerge from this nation Greece, but they will not hold the same power as he did. So when Alexander died, four sub-kingdoms within Greece arose. Macedonia and Greece, Asia Minor, Egypt and Palestine, Syria and Persia. Those are these four horns that come to replace Alexander's supreme power. They hold power, but not like he did. Verse 23, in the latter part of their reign, when rebels have become completely wicked, a fierce-looking king, a master of intrigue, will arise. Almost all scholars recognize that Antiochus is fulfilling what Gabriel's predicted here in these verses. He arose in the latter period of the 4 kingdoms that came into existence after Alexander's death. This was going to happen when the wrongdoers have run their course. So this horn that grew up out of these other 4 is Antiochus. Verse 24, he will become very strong, but not by his own power, right? Because God's going to allow him to do these things, and he will cause astounding devastation, which we talked about. He will succeed in whatever he does, which we talked about. He will destroy those who are mighty, the holy people. We talked about, right? He was powerful because God allowed him to be powerful. This goes back to what we saw earlier, where his power will be very strong, but not by his own power. He did a lot of damage. He did extraordinary damage to Jerusalem, to the temple. He became prosperous. He carried out his objective, which is he does as he pleases. He destroys powerful people, mighty men, including the Jewish high priest and many other Jews, the holy people. Verse 25. And he will cause deceit to prosper. He will consider himself superior. And when they feel secure, he will destroy many and take his stand against the prince of princes. And we'll talk about who that is. And yet he will be destroyed, but not by humans. So he will fool many people, Antiochus will. With his shrewdness, people will be unsuspecting. He will deceive people. He will exalt himself, right? He'll make himself great in his own mind, even to the extent that he would mint currency, coins that bore his image with the inscription underneath, God manifest. This is who Antiochus was. He lifted himself up and made money with his face on it that said, I'm God. And he opposed the Prince of Princes. Who's the Prince of Princes? Yahweh, God. Antiochus here did on a much smaller scale what the Antichrist is going to do on a much larger scale. If we look to history, what Antiochus did to the Jews, and we think that was just minuscule to what the Antichrist is going to do when his time comes, that should wake us up a little bit. The Antichrist will also oppose the Prince of Princes, God, God the Father, God the Son. But God will break him, not by human power, but by his power. Verse 26, and the vision of evenings and mornings that has been given to you, the 2300, it is all true. But seal it up because it concerns the distant future. So the title that Gabriel gives here is the vision of the evenings and the mornings. This describes a particular period in time when this would come to fulfillment. And again, this was around when Antiochus was defeated in 167 to 164 BC is when he had his go on the Jews, but he would eventually come to an end as well. And so Daniel here, Gabriel's telling him, seal up the vision. Not in the sense of making it a secret, but in the sense of record it, finish it, preserve it, because it's pertaining to many days in the future as well as beyond, which is in reference to us, what is yet to come in the time of the tribulation and the reign of Antichrist and the return of Jesus. This is all still yet to come. And verse 27, Daniel says, I was worn out. This whole experience left him exhausted. I lay exhausted for several days, and then I got up, and then I went about the king's business. Just like we can feel tired after a rough night's sleep of having a nightmare, a bad dream, Daniel was worn out, exhausted by this whole vision. For 3 days, he couldn't get out of bed. It left him so drained that he couldn't go back to work until eventually he could. And it was probably the knowledge that this severe persecution was in store for the holy people in verse 24 that was distressing him. And I was appalled by the vision. It was beyond understanding. In spite of Gabriel interpreting this vision for him, there were things that Daniel still didn't understand about this. He had to live with these unanswered questions because God's not providing him with any further revelation to help him. This was it. Gabriel explained it. There were still some unknowns, and this troubled him. But the progress of history would bring it to light. You know, had Daniel lived longer, he would have seen some of this. We have seen it. To us, it's history. To him, it was future. But to us as well, there's more yet to come. The little horn in chapter 7 was the Antichrist. The little horn here in chapter 8 is Antiochus in the short term and Antichrist in the long term. Chapter 7 focuses generally on believers as the target of the Antichrist's oppression. Chapter 8 focuses on the Jews as the target of Antiochus' oppression. But there's still indication in both of these chapters, 7 and 8, that in the long view, that the Jews will still be the objects of great persecution. And this time of the Gentiles that we live in, that Jesus talks about in Luke's gospel, from the reign of Nebuchadnezzar taking the Jews into exile until Christ returns, all during this time of the Gentiles, the Jews have been under great persecution. There were only 4 great world empires that were anticipated by Daniel, and you know that was the Babylonians, the Greeks, the Persians, the Romans. Out of all of those, the only ones that showed any type of relative kindness to the Israelites was the Persian Empire. In fact, they allowed, Cyrus allowed the Israelites to return home. Other than that, they've been under immense persecution since this time in history. And again, just as Jesus indicates in Luke's Gospel, chapter 21-24, the times of the Gentiles is characterized by the trending down of Jerusalem and the subjugation and the persecution of the people of Israel. And that is Daniel chapter 8. And I pray that that has been a help to you. And there's so much in here. I mean, we could spend days and days and weeks talking about this. So go back, reread, check your commentaries, reread other books, reread some of the history that maybe in school you thought, well, this is nothing that interests me, talking about Alexander the Great. Now you have some background on how it all ties into this vision in Scripture. But thank you for being here this evening. Tomorrow we'll look at chapter 9, and we're going to look at Daniel's vision of the 70 sevens. So have a wonderful rest of your evening here in Nebraska. Beautiful day. So I hope wherever you are at, you're having some good weather. Have a wonderful rest of your evening. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Till then, take care. God bless. Bye-bye.